Welcome back, Marines, and good evening. On to our next segment of exposing the individuals that have been and are directly involved in the violations that help perpetuate the fall from grace of the Marine Corps League, Department of Ohio. The title Paymaster originated during the American Civil War era. The Marine Corps thought it was a vital and necessary aspect to taking care of its Marines. Therefore, they created the Department of the Paymaster, as illustrated in the slide, the manual from 1918. The Corps also went as far as to assign the members of this department within the Marine Corps its own rank insignia, along with its own collar emblem to signify that this individual was in fact the paymaster for the United States Marine Corps. So, what is the paymaster? The paymaster is an individual responsible for paying authorized bills. He's also responsible for assuring the legitimacy of payment requests, budget and or board of trustee approvals prior to releasing funds for disbursement. He or she is also responsible for assuring that proper documentation accompanies requests for payments in the form of invoicing or billing, receipts and or approvals necessary to disperse those funds. Now, the position of paymaster within the detachment and the department, as well as the national organization, play a vital role in that unit's success. Now, with any position, it varies as to the level of involvement needed to be successful. In many cases, the paymaster is also the adjutant at the detachment and department level mostly. I've always believed that the paymaster and adjutant position should be two separate stations within the organization at each level. I find it very difficult, and many others may as well, to handle both jobs at the same time with the same level of attention to detail required from each position while adhering to the state, federal, and local requirements of both positions. So, what has transpired over the years is this. Many, not all, but many of our state departments within the national organization have produced their own paymaster manual or guide for their respective departments only. Now, the purpose of this is to help an individual through what is needed to be an effective paymaster. Ohio does not have such a guide, yet they are proposing to establish a paymaster's guide for the Department of Ohio, and you can get a copy of that right off of the Department of Ohio's webpage. It's approximately 54 pages long, and it's a recapitulation of the Department of Kansas manual, for example, which is used and maintained currently by Harvey L. Harris. As a matter of fact, the following statement is included in the Ohio's proposed version of the Paymaster Guide. Thanks go out to the Department of Kansas, Nebraska, Illinois, West Virginia, who have very similar guides. It doesn't take much to change a word from Kansas to Ohio and maybe try to get it to work for us in Ohio without a thorough review of the materials contained within that manual. Not saying it's not a good thing, not saying it's a bad thing. What I'm saying is Ohioans should put together their paymaster guide or manual if they so desire to have one. Now, with that being said, and coupled with the importance of the paymaster position, Why is there no manual at the national level? The national level doesn't provide many, if any, guide manuals or operational manuals for the departments and or detachments to use to draw information from to help become successful in what these individuals need to do. Currently, the national organization has only 2 on their webpage. The first being a recruiting and retention guide, and the second being a guide for the detachments on how to do their organizational business or operations, a detachment's guide, an officer's guide, so to speak, which outlines each officer's particular duties in a paragraph or so. Now, with that being said, I would have to assume that the bylaws and the administrative procedures cover all of the remaining requirements that needs to happen or have to have happened as it pertains to the paymaster's responsibility not only to the organization but to the membership of whom he serves, i.e. the detachment or the department, for example. We all believe, and I believe this with all my heart, that the position of the paymaster requires an individual to demonstrate a higher level of ethical standard and proficiency than most, if not all, other positions within the league. The departments of Ohio and detachment Justice M. Chamber 555 paymaster / adjutant Thom Seymour failed the membership and directly contributed to the fall from grace. Thom Seymour has held the position of paymaster / adjutant for several years now. I am willing to go out on a limb and say it's been 10 plus years now. Therefore, I am assuming, or at least giving him the benefit of the doubt, that he was doing his job in accordance with the references prior to all this happening. Or, at a minimum, he just has never been held accountable until the investigation into the failures of the department and detachment surfaced. Based on the evidence discovered, Mr. Seymour has not, in fact, been doing his job. In fact, he has caused his detachment to suffer a loss of membership and revenues. He has misrepresented and lied to the membership of both the department and his detachment. And lastly, he has misappropriated those funds entrusted to him by the membership from both accounts. Yet, hey, he gets a free pass from the national leadership and is allowed to continue to handle the department funds currently, bringing disgrace to the membership of Ohio and the national organization. Thom Seymour is a member of Detachment 555, the Justice M. Chambers Detachment here in Ohio. And until just recently, he was the paymaster for both his detachment and the Department of Ohio for many years. Once the investigations began into his actions over the past year or so, and the results started to surface, he thought he could get out in front of it by going ahead and resigning in December of 2022. His resignation came prior to the findings of the National JA on 3 sets of charges against Thom Seymour, where the NJA, Mr. Miller, found no merit at all. So he resigned on the heels of being replaced and removed from office for cause by his detachment members and board of trustees. So Mr. Seymour, in fact, with the evidence, has been linked to the mishandling of membership funds entrusted to him by the membership, the mishandling of donations received by him from various entities and members, the laundering of funds between a defunct organization and the detachment, and lastly, making unauthorized purchases with a Marine Corps League credit card. Okay, you might think $90 is a little nothing. However, this $90 was used to purchase cameras that were not approved by the body or the board of trustees or any other individual for him to do so. Mr. Seymour, Amy Imperator, Tim Sherman and Jerry Holt got together and they started taking pictures of individuals performing their duties at their detachment meetings to validate or support their claims against associate members and the actions of the detachment leadership itself. When questioned about this, they were told that Jerry Holt authorized it, that he wanted them to do that. The detachment was set back a little bit by that. Now, upon his resignation, the detachment has yet to receive those cameras back and or any other accounting for those cameras. Paramount to stealing, that's all that is. Misappropriation of funds and unauthorized purchases on a credit card. These are just a sampling, just a little bit of the fraudulent actions committed by Mr. Seymour at his detachment and the department level. All right, so let's begin with the mishandling of the membership funds received by Thom Seymour as the paymaster, Detachment 555. In this slide, you can see that Mr. Seymour had to write a personal check because he failed to deposit membership funds when he received them as far back as June of 2022. This was not an isolated issue, and the evidence shows that this affected many of the detachment's members in an adverse way. So, hey, let's look at what happens when the paymaster fails to do his fiduciary duties to the organization and to the membership. The first thing that comes to mind is the status of the member. Now, status of a member is one of two things. One, he's in good standing, or he's not in good standing. It's that simple. To be in good standing, your dues have to be up to date and paid. Not to be in good standing, they haven't been paid. It's no more simple than that. Very clear, cut, dry. So, here's how it goes. Mr. Seymour gets your check for membership dues. He's supposed to take that check within a very timely fashion and manner, deposit that check into the detachment's account. Well, hey, it appears Mr. Seymour has a preponderance to forget to do that. Not only the three that he's making up for in this slide, but others as well. So what happens? Well, what Mr. Seymour does is he throws your check into a file, a box, a drawer, desk drawer. God knows where he puts it. We don't know. But what we do know is that he turns around and, if you're lucky, writes a check out of the detachment's funds for your membership portion to the department and to the national organization. Now, he does that even though he never deposited your check. Ladies and gentlemen, that is taking money out of the account, paramount to just stealing it, misappropriating it. Let's put it that way, misappropriating it. So, in the interim, what happens is one, you get your membership card, but you can't figure why your check hadn't cleared yet. Or you can't track your check if you even look for that check. So you get your membership card. Okay, you don't question, you don't ask, you move forward. Maybe you don't get your membership card. And you finally ask, hey, Tom, I haven't got my membership card. I paid my dues over 2 months ago. Mr. Seymour would turn around and tell you a bald-faced lie that it is on national because they're backed up, they're having long lead times, they haven't processed checks yet, and a myriad of different things as to why you don't have that card. Eventually, Mr. Seymour will get back with you because this is one of those checks that he perhaps never did follow up with the transmittal to department or national. So now, guess what, folks? You're a member not in good standing. And what he'll tell you is, oh, they must have misplaced those checks that were sent. Or, the better one, he says, you know, when we turn those checks into the bank, I show deposit, but they don't show that they were processed. I really don't know what happened to that check. So what he's going to do, he's going to turn around and ask you to say, hey, cut me another check for membership dues. I'll get it all taken care of. I'll get it submitted. In the interim, why don't you stop payment on that check that you wrote a couple months ago just in case it shows up somewhere, which costs you extra money. And it's also caused you to endure some stress you should have never had to do if Mr. Seymour would have done his job in the beginning by processing it when he received it in accordance with our bylaws and administrative procedures. So I touched a little bit on it, but here's the second thing that pops up from this accounting practice of Mr. Seymour. And we just covered it, but what we really need to say here is that Mr. Seymour, because he is the paymaster and the department paymaster, arbitrarily takes money out of the general fund to pay individuals' dues to the department and to the national because it needs to be done in accordance with the reference. But he fails to put the money into the account, which causes the problem. So, you have to understand, folks, that a detachment's account, its general fund, so to speak, along with the department, for example, the monies in that account are comprised of mostly donations, fundraising endeavors such as your golf outing or chili cook-off, and most importantly, but not least, is the members paying their dues. And this dues that you pay the detachment not only covers the detachment, it covers the department, and it covers the national requirements to be a member for that fiscal year. Okay? That money, whether it was thrown in a drawer, in a box, in a desk, it doesn't matter. If it didn't go into the account, then why are we writing a check out of the account for your dues? Others have put their money in that account, and that money's gone into that account, and we're using that money to pay your dues, which hasn't gone into that account. You see that? It's kind of hard sometimes to grasp, but he's robbing Peter today. He's paying Paul and Mary and forgets to give Peter back his daggum money that he borrowed. It's a classic scam run deal, not that he's benefiting from it, ladies and gentlemen, but it's paramount to Ponzi. I'll take what you give me here, and I'll pay it with something over there, and take it over here, whatever, whatever. It's wrong, and it's a failure on his abilities to do his job. Now, the only reason we really hammering on this is because Mr. Seymour is a self-proclaimed subject matter expert in financial accounting. He has made many statements at convention and other meetings or get-togethers, staff meetings, whatever the case might be, how well he's able to balance the GOP's budget and mentor, a political party's budget, to the penny. He's good at it. But here in the league, and to use the layman terms, he sucks at it. He just can't do his job. So, all of this was discovered, as you see here on the slide and other things moving forward, in the files that he turned over to the detachment after leaving the position of paymaster in December of 2022. So, it begs me to wonder. It really screams at me saying, hey, how many of you out there in detachment 555, or even at other detachments who've sent money into the department, have or had to go through something similar to not having their card, backtracking, repaying dues, and resubmitting for membership cards to Mr. Seymour? I wonder how many of you truly had to do that. Now, just a couple others. Mr. Mullinex submitted his check June 18, 2022, never deposited. Miss Imperative supposedly submitted a money order or a cashier's check in September 2022, never cashed. Mr. Burns submitted his cash, which was still in the file, cash, with a paper clip to his receipt in November of 2022, still yet to be deposited. Mr. Salina submitted his check in November of 2022. I could go on, but I think you get the point. These are but a few individuals that the documents in this file indicate this particular practice of Mr. Seymour. And as you can see from that personal check, written in January 2023, that nearly 2 months, if not longer, had gone by prior to even getting the monies issued from the general fund to Department International back into the account of the detachment. Something as a restitution to the account to say, oh, I paid it, but now I owe you. Unbelievable. Poor performance and a true lack of accountability. When we speak of donations made to the detachment, we are talking about real money being given to the detachment to make the lives of our brothers and sisters better through the mission statement of the Marine Corps League. Here's a prime example of the results of those donations and what happened to many of them. There were many of these types of checks going back years within the files turned over by Mr. Seymour. Currently, many of them cannot be recovered or reissued because of individuals that made the initial donation or wrote the initial check have since died, or they've actually put a stop payment and will not reissue that donation back to the detachment. So what's that mean? The overall experience that we provided to the individual, to the organizations donating, is unforgivable. Mr. Seymour believes himself to be a financial subject matter expert. He often bragged about his ability to balance the books within a penny at his local GOP position and mentor. Yet clearly, there is some room for improvement in his accounting methods. Sadly, these checks and similar ones just like this check have cost the detachment between $1,000 and $1,500 of revenues that could have been used to help our brothers and sisters. As noted earlier, Mr. Seymour has been his detachment's paymaster for a minimum of a decade. All the issues in accounting and proposed violations of the state and federal laws were filed against the Board of Trustee members of the detachment and not Mr. Seymour. And these filings came as a grievance from Amy the Snake Imperator in January of 2023. Now, these filings were done after Mr. Seymour was cleared of the disciplinary charges against him and after he stepped aside, supposedly, as the paymaster for the detachment. So, why in the world would Miss Imperator wait to file her grievance against the board members of the detachment that she claimed within that grievance had violated or committed those actions for a period of a year now? It has been ongoing. Well, the reason's clear. And on the instructions of and provided by Mr. Holt to the filing of said grievance for Miss Imperator, that it would be better served once Mr. Seymour was clear and free of the charges and the position of paymaster for his detachment. Thus, her filing went in on January 22nd of 2023. Now, Mr. Miller's response to that grievance was contained in a letter dated 14 February 2023 addressed to Miss Imperator, which produced and or validated the reasoning behind her claims, along with the timing of the filing and Mr. Holt's plans for the Department of Ohio. All of this is tied together, and his letter to her validates that. So what does Mr. Miller say? Well, Mr. Miller turns around and changes the grievance against the Board of Trustee members and places it against the entire detachment membership. This is the entire detachment now is being charged or having a grievance filed against them for these accusations made by Miss Imperator. He also in that letter, here we go, he also in that letter appoints Jerry Holt to investigate said allegations that were levied against now the entire detachment. And in Mr. Miller's letter, and I quote, albeit an informal investigation of the accusations being made, several are of such a nature that if they should prove to hold merit and cross over into the violation of criminal law, then in accordance with Section 9100, then corresponding complaints should be made directly to the local, state, and federal authorities. End quote. Hell, Marines, we've been doing that since 2021. We presented filings of violations of the ORC complaints and IRS filings against the Department and National Organization. However, I guess, in no short terms of the meaning, that when National and Department are not trying to shut down a detachment or benefit themselves in some manner, then it's an entirely different matter. So, what happened, or what was the outcome of Mr. Holt's investigation of these allegations levied against Detachment 555? So, after Mr. Holt and Dave Englert were assigned to look into the 18 filed grievances now against the Detachment's Board of Trustees, and later changed to the entire detachment by Mr. Miller, Mr. Holt and Mr. Englert produced an 8-page document containing their findings along with a signature page for those members agreeing to take corrective action as needed based on the recommendations from this investigative report. The memo contained their findings to each accusation. I will cover those that had significance and leaves those out that had no merit based on Mr. Holt's findings or responses out of his presentation back to Mr. Miller. First off, item 1. Minutes were not correctly maintained or available. Mr. Seymour was solely responsible for this failure as the adjutant, and it was his job to make those records available and to produce those records for the past 10 years and couldn't do so. Item 3 in the report discussed was resolved prior to the investigation. However, Mr. Holt and his team just could not or cannot wrap their heads around the fact that an associate member can become a regular member and then hold an elected position in accordance with the current national bylaws. So, as a side note, folks, if your detachment wants to accomplish this for its outstanding associate member, contact me. I can walk you through it. Might want to hurry up, though, because the annual national convention might just have removed it or have to remove it. But neither here nor there. Moving forward, item 5 in this report found this to be a valid accusation against the paymaster. Mr. Seymour, I quote the report, "This is a valid grievance. Audits have not been conducted in conformance with the detachment bylaws. When audits have been performed, they have not been properly documented and presented to the membership. Audit results must clearly identify sources of revenue and disbursement or expenditure of funds, especially as they relate to the interaction with the Colonel Justice M. Chambers Foundation." Also noted in this response was, and I quote, "The detachment paymaster shall be responsible for the collection of all funds. A financial statement will be presented at each meeting. Trustees shall conduct a final audit of account ledgers not more than 30 days after the installation of a newly elected officer or when there's a change in paymasters." So, folks, please remember the previous slides, and I'll give you a quick refresher right here. Please remember that the detachment paymaster position was vacated in December of 2022, and this report came out in March of 2023. They squarely put the onus and the responsibility of the failure of this particular portion of this grievance, as I noted earlier, on the shoulders of Thom Seymour. No other explanation can be given for that. Item 7. This was about $65,000 being improperly reported on tax filings. Mr. Seymour again made those 990 reports and was responsible for the filings of said reports. And I quote again, "This issue is beyond the ability of the investigating team to adequately evaluate. It is apparent, however, that the tax return reflects a combination of the income, expense, and assets of both the detachment and the Colonel Justice M. Chambers Foundation. Since the foundation does not have an EIN, is not recognized as a nonprofit with the IRS, and has lost its incorporated nonprofit status with the state of Ohio, this issue must be resolved prior to the end of the fiscal and prior to the next tax filing," end quote. This, of course, was resolved for the price of a burger and a beer. The responsibility of those filings, again, fell on the shoulders of Mr. Seymour. The movement of that money between the foundation and the detachment, again, fell on the shoulders of Mr. Seymour. All of this validates what we've been saying since 2022 in regards to the performance of Mr. Thom Seymour. So let's go on with the report. Item 11 goes along with item 5, of course, and I quote, "Detachment bylaws indicate that detachment is the proprietor of Gunny's Hall. However, the foundation owns the building, and if the bar, bingo, and gaming operations are licensed under the foundation, the detachment and the league has no jurisdiction," end quote. One of the several significant findings of this report made by Mr. Holt and Mr. Englert was the following, and I quote again, "The relationship and financial transactions between the highly state-controlled bingo operation, the bar, and the department, or as you were, the detachment, give the appearance of money laundering. Ohio regulates how bingo funds can be distributed. Bank transactions show bingo funds being transferred to the detachment, a legitimate nonprofit charitable organization, and the detachment then turning around and transferring said monies back to a defunct foundation, Colonel Justice M. Chambers Foundation, an entity whose nonprofit status was revoked in 2010 by the Ohio Secretary of State, and which has no EIN and is not registered as a nonprofit with the IRS. So, ladies and gentlemen and Marines, what job, if any, do you suppose handles all of this for the detachment? If you guessed the paymaster, well, damn, you earned what we used to call a BCD, a big chicken dinner. Now, for the second part of that question, who do you suppose was filling that job for 10 plus years and up to December of 2022? If you guessed Mr. Seymour, then by golly, Miss Molly, you now get a slice of pie with that meal. So why hasn't Mr. Seymour faced any accountability for these failures outlined in Mr. Holt's report? All three of these filings listed on this slide were sent via certified mail return receipt requested to then National JA Phil Samora, now the National JA Russ Miller, and our National Commandant, Johnny Baker. The provisions as set forth in these charges received by the NJAs were supported by a multitude of physical evidence and depositions. The charges against Mr. Seymour that I will move forward with are contained in all three of these documents. The first being Mr. Seymour violated his oath of office by not following the bylaws, administrative procedures, and failing to ensure that individuals were present for elections and installation during the time period or periods as outlined on the ROIs prior to him certifying them for the national office. Excuse me. Mr. Seymour was involved in fabricating a ROI on May 18, 2022, with Darrell Logan and Roger Smith. Informants will testify as to the event never taking place and that they were not present, nor did they know of this installation of officers, and they were contained on the roster. Mr. Seymour participated in fraudulent election and installations of officers during March 17, 2022 at the supposed Board of Trustee meeting at the Spring Central Division Conference, and he outright lied to the face of a true board member, hopefully to deter him from attending or participating in said board meeting. Witnesses to this account were and are still willing to testify and provide statements as to the contents of said discussions. In accordance with the administrative procedures, Mr. Seymour violated Chapter 9, Section 9105, subsection C and D by demonstrating and committing personal actions detrimental to the Marine Corps League by submitting false documentation and statements to the national organization as well as department and detachment membership. Mr. Seymour authorized payments of funds from the general fund that requires approval from the body or the Board of Trustees prior to the expenditures being made to Roger Smith and Jimmy Kay, as depicted in the financial records of the Department of Ohio. This alone should have had Mr. Seymour suspended from all duties pending the outcome of said investigation, along with a hold being placed on the department's accounts until an outside audit was performed on all departmental transactions. Mr. Seymour violated Ohio's laws and administrative rules, ORCs, Title 17, Corporation Partnerships, Chapter 1702, Nonprofit Corporation Law. These violations alone could or should have caused the Department of Ohio to lose its accreditation and tax-exempt status with the state and federal government when reported. Violations of 1702.30, the authority of directors. Violation of ORC 1716.17, fiduciary duties. Violation of ORC 1716.04, the annual reports. Violation of ORC 1702.15, corporation to keep books and records of account and minutes of all proceedings. Violations of ORC 1702.54, false statements or entries on behalf of the organization. This names only a few of the violations of the ORCs that Mr. Miller later says he read and researched and didn't find any merit. I doubt Mr. Miller could even understand the Ohio Revised Code. Mr. Seymour failed to maintain the official records for the department, since assuming the position as the department's adjutant. This would include the minutes of all meetings, copies of all ROIs, and providing the support to the membership when copies of said records in his charge were requested for review. Who would have believed all these charges would continue on, but yet they do. Mr. Seymour violated his oath of office and membership by causing undue stress on individuals throughout the department and his detachment as it pertains to the handling of department and detachment monies and transmittals. Mr. Seymour not only did his detachment wrong, but he's done all the detachments in Ohio. If you haven't noticed, it would take several months to process a transmittal from the detachment to the department, and several months for those funds vital to our membership to be deposited at department and forwarded on to national for these individuals' membership. So again, I ask all of you, why hasn't Mr. Seymour been found accountable for these transgressions against the department and the detachment membership? So everyone here must be thinking, what the hell? How could anyone be allowed to get away with such egregious behavior? Well, the answer's simple. You have a Sergeant Schultz, I know nothing type of individual reviewing said charges. You see, if Mr. Miller, Mr. Baker, or even Mr. Holt cannot benefit from it, they will not do anything with it. Mr. Holt wanted the Justice M. Chambers detachment to be shut down. Thereby, they could claim the assets on behalf of the league, and they also would be silencing a second individual that stands against them and the way they operate within the department. So, remember back a few frames when Amy the Snake Imperator filed her grievance in January of 2023, which took about 5 days at a minimum to get delivered to the NJA, Mr. Miller in Colorado. So he didn't even have it until about the beginning of the week of January 30th. Is a safe bet. You would not believe, based on Mr. Miller's past inabilities to get anything completed in accordance with Chapter 9 on schedule and on time, how quickly he and Mr. Holt jumped on this. Hell, it was like white on rice or stink on shit. They were quick. Unbelievable. We also talked a few frames back about the letter dated February 14, 2023 from Mr. Miller to Miss Imperator, and the appointment of Mr. Holt within that letter to perform a thorough investigation into said grievance. Now you have to remember, if you know anything about the league and this grievance and disciplinary process, the grievance is the channel in which you file something that you want to have resolved, yet there is no punishment being able to be distributed based on the findings of that grievance. If you want charges, or if you want to have someone be responsible and accountable, 9 times out of 10 you have to file a disciplinary filing. So, in that letter, which was a grievance, it charged the entire detachment with those allegations made by Amy the Snake Imperator, 18 of them as a matter of fact. He also told Mr. Holt he had until 10 March to complete said investigation and report back to him. As provided earlier, you know how that went. Yet there was nothing discovered to warrant charging any member or the detachment with a disciplinary charge out of the 18 allegations investigated. Why is that? Well, their friend Thom Seymour would have been at the brunt of it, and they're not going to charge Thom. So they let it ride out. They instead made up this little agreement that the current detachment officers would sign, saying, yeah, we'll continue to work on the things that seem to be out of place. However, we've been working on those things as a detachment since December. And a lot of those things that were found in that report had already been resolved as noted by Mr. Holt. So they actually didn't do anything because they couldn't do anything, one. And two, they definitely couldn't get their hands on the assets. So the corrective action plan was recommended. However, like I said, the detachment officers were already on it and underway. They basically did nothing. What we have to remember here is that Mr. Miller got someone else to investigate because of location into the allegations on a grievance. Yet he got nobody. He assigned no one to investigate the disciplinary charges that were filed in August of 2022 and February of 2023 against Thom Seymour. None of those were assigned an investigative committee. He did it all from Colorado. He must be some kind of individual. So let's compare that disciplinary charge against Thom Seymour with the grievance that Miss Imperator filed against the detachment / Board of Trustee members. August 12th, disciplinary charges filed against Thom Seymour outlining the very same accusations and allegations made by Miss Imperator levied against the Board of Trustees and then converted by Mr. Miller against the entire detachment. Now, Mr. Miller found no reason to investigate said filings based on his personal investigation into the matter, as stated in his response. Now, this is at the same detachment where he assigned Mr. Holt again to investigate a grievance. Mr. Miller's response also said that the filing included with the statements that without any evidence which was provided and validated by Mr. Holt's investigation, that the petitioner, which would be me and the individual from the Detachment 555, could be charged and held liable for making such accusations against Thom Seymour. Shame on us for thinking that Thom was the kind of individual he was identified to be by Jerry Holt in the later investigation. But shame on us for bringing it up in August. Folks, you can't make this up. We truly have a Sergeant Schultz at the helm of the JA office. No denying it. August 22nd, again, with a time delay in mailing, the second set of charges made by an individual from yet another detachment was filed against Thom Seymour. Mr. Miller found no merit based on what ifs. Now, he's a man from Colorado, and I have to say, what if Bigfoot is real? Would we investigate that? Or would we just use that as a reasoning to justify something? What if the sky was blue today? Wow. Mr. Miller goes on to indicate that one cannot prove a quorum existed at the 2019 convention when the department bylaws were adopted. Therefore, the violations noted in the filing have no merit. I'm awestruck. It just really I am. The 2019 bylaws and administrative procedures were signed and accepted by the department body, voted on by the body, submitted to the national organization, JA, who at that time was Warren Griffin. He reviewed them, he liked them, he saw the notes, and he signed a paper saying that they're accepted and approved as a department bylaws. So as far as Mr. Miller's claim, he cannot disprove that a quorum was present. Yet he's going to put that out there to quantify a no merit filing. It is not our job to prove that there was a quorum. We proved it, though, with the letter signed by the NJA accepting our bylaws. He has not proved that there was no quorum. So again, he's living in that reality world of I know nothing. I believe actually in reality they call that some form of a narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. I say this because in all three findings, his narcissism often manifested itself through an innate sense of victimhood, which is why he continually shifted the blame over to me, someone else, or another external factor such as a quorum in 2019, which had little to no control over what he was currently being assigned with. Mr. Miller based solely his findings on what if, and found no merit and was unable to substantiate any of his claims with actual evidence. Yet Mr. Baker and the others at the national level went right along with it because it was Mr. Baker's plan all along. Absolve Thom Seymour, kick Paul Smith out. Start working on closing detachment 555. Kick Frank Groen out. That's the plan. That's how they've been doing this. But, oh no, you didn't think he was unaware of all that, did you? Did you really? Come on. In summary, the allegations against Thom Seymour are sustainable only because the evidence ties him directly to the violations and the findings of the investigation by Mr. Holt. His hand is clearly in the cookie jar. It's no one else's. It's tied to his upper torso. He is guilty. Contrary to what Mr. Miller wants you to believe, it is not make-believe. We're not coming up with these stories because we don't like Thom Seymour. We don't come up with these stories because we do like Thom Seymour. The reality of it is it's the truth. Thom Seymour has violated what it means to be a Marine, and he's done that, especially against those Marines of the Department of Ohio and the membership of his detachment. The national organization has been aware of this, and they know all of this to be true. However, they have allowed it to continue to this date. Mr. Holt oversees the little knucklehead gang, I call them, of Roger Smith, Tim Sherman, Amy Imperatou, and Thom Seymour. These four individuals are determined to destroy the Department of Ohio and make it into their own image. And Mr. Holt is doing it with them. Unbelievable. But there is some good news, or some light at the end of the tunnel, as they say. And in the Corps, we say the scuttlebutt has it that Thom Seymour is not going to run for either the paymaster or adjutant position at the department level during the June convention. See, folks, prayers do get answered. Thom is a disgrace. And nothing he can say with his righteous little pleadings will change the fact that he had his hands knee deep in the pot and he was stirring it. So, always when there's a little good news, somebody says, well, what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is, scuttlebutt again has it, that Amy the Snake Imperator is considering running for paymaster at the department level. Now, this is a Marine who, and again, I use Marine term loosely only because she probably, made it through boot camp, but is also supposedly a CPA, knowledgeable about financial matters, allowed these financial ordeals or transactions or violations to precipitate, and continue on for over a year within the detachment and did nothing. She's also the one who went ahead and made sure that she would file this grievance against the detachment and the Board of Trustee members because of those egregious violations. Yes, she allowed them to precipitate. She allowed them to grow. She allowed them to go on and did nothing. Over a year, ladies and gentlemen, she did that. So, she works on the Knucklehead Gang. She's at detachments, taking pictures of members, associate or regular, as they conduct business to use against them in possible disciplinary actions. And when questioned about it, she told the detachment that she was told to do that by Jerry Holt. So, I'm not going to say anything more about that for now. I'll expose Mr. Holt later on for what he is. But Amy the Snake and Parrot 2, that's her reward. After all, it's a just reward for stabbing fellow Marines in the back and for selling out her detachment membership. Until next time, remember, if you need anything, any data, any copies of anything to connect all these dots or validate what has been said, then you can contact me and I'll be more than happy to provide it to you. As G.I. Joe, and that's for you older guys who knew or watched those cartoons with your kids, G.I. Joe always said, now you know, and knowing is half the battle. The next episode that I'll be doing will be on the individual who suffers from a God complex. And I plan on showing you who he really is. Hope to see you then. God bless and Semper Fi, Marines. Until next time.